We are talking trades on today's episode, but before we begin, help me reach our subscriber goal before the NFL draft starts at 35,000 subs, 433 away. So if you haven't yet, click that sub button down below. Let's talk about a topic that I think a lot of fans have a lot of interest in, which is the possibility of the Falcons trading the number 15 draft pick. And by trading it, I mean moving back. I really don't forecast Atlanta moving up in the draft. Now, I'm bringing this up today because, one, it feels like it's had a long time coming type of conversation, just given the lack of draft capital the Falcons have. Plus, I saw this article from ESPN where Jordan Reid talked about the Falcons possibly moving on from pick 15, saying one team constantly brought up as a trade back candidate is the Atlanta Falcons at number 15. Terry Fontenot was traded back only once during his 4-year tenure, but the team also only has 5 picks. In a deep class of edge rushers, Atlanta might feel comfortable with several options if they have similar grades on the team's board. This, to me, could become an ideal situation. I don't think a trade would actually happen until, 15 on the clock type of deal. I mean, sometimes we've seen teams trade their pick before the draft begins. Last year, the Texans traded their first-round pick to the Minnesota Vikings. But I think Atlanta would be comfortable with sitting still and waiting to see what happens 1 through 14. And then, depending on who's available, if they get a good enough or just decent offer, it could be enticing enough to move back a few spots and gain some extra valuable draft picks. I think this Chat Sports mock draft that we did live on Thursday is a very good representation of this type of situation, where you can see what I was looking at when the Falcons were on the board at 15 and who was no longer available. Mike Green, Jalen Walker, Will Johnson, Jahad Campbell, a lot of the top prospects for the Falcons taken. And at that stage, it felt like, okay, I can either maybe reach on a defensive end or try to go with a more traditional best player available type of pick. And if you watch the live show, you know what I did, and that's why I'm called Petey Fontenot now. But, anywho, I think in this scenario, it would be ideal for the Falcons to move back a few spots and get the same type of player they're looking at 15, around 20 or so, and get an extra day 2 draft pick. So in a perfect world, the Falcons trade back from 15 to somewhere in the early 20s most likely and get someone like Mykel Williams, who they could have a lot of interest in at pick 15 if their top 3 guys are taken at that point. And they walk away with the same player they were going to get at 15 and an extra draft pick. Now the gamble here is if Mykel Williams or whoever they're looking at 15 is taken before they are next on the clock again, was the trade back worth it, right? If they get no offers for 15, they're going to have someone they're going to submit. So they got someone who's at the top of their board. If that someone is not there when they're next up on the clock again, does that extra 3rd-round pick make up for it? That's what Terry Fontenot and the Falcons have to decide on. But let's talk about Mykel Williams a little bit and just some of the possibilities of a trade back, what it could look like, and what you could get. Williams is a player that I want to put on your radar sort of towards the last minute here. We've talked about him before on the channel, but how about just pumping his tires a little bit more, because the guy is an awesome profile for a pick. 6'5", 260. So he's got tremendous size. He's got good speed, 4.77 40-yard dashes. Sure, not one of the fastest, but I don't think he's a slowpoke or something like that. He's also only 20 years old. Doesn't even have dad strength yet, right? He is not a full-grown man. He's going to continue to mature, and like any other 20-year-old, they're going to put more muscle on, and they're going to get faster and stronger. That's just basic human anatomy. So don't forget that when looking at some of these younger prospects. Plus, I mean, by the time he gets his second contract, he's going to be 24, 25. That's younger than some of the players in this draft class right now. Now, the knock is his junior year this past season was supposed to be the big breakout year. Didn't really happen. From a production standpoint, really wasn't there. Now, to be fair, he did play through a high ankle sprain for most of the season. And that's a fair thing to look at for why the production wasn't where you'd want it to be. Also, when the chips were down in the biggest games, like against Texas twice, he was all over Quinn Ewers when they played him the first time in the regular season and then the second time in the SEC championship game. So if you're looking for a guy that comes to play when, the lights are the brightest and doesn't just feast on some sacks against FCS teams in September, he definitely showcased the ability to rise up to the occasion. And to me, no pun intended, that's got to be something that you put more stock into than, all right, 2 sacks against Texas, or player B who had 6 sacks between MTSU, the Citadel, and Alabama A&M. I'd rather have the 2 sacks against Texas than the 6 sacks against those 3 teams. So that's got to be a big piece of the puzzle when doing your Mykel Williams evaluation. 5 sacks, I'm not going to try and pass it off as good. And you know how much I value production. But I can at least entertain both sides of the argument. Ankle injury, the way he played against some of the top competition, that to me has to have some more weight than just balancing it all out across all 12, 13, 14 games that UGA played. Now, I want to show you guys what a trade back could look like and what team I have in mind that wants to trade up. But first things first, I do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Game Time. They make getting tickets faster and easier, even for hard-to-get playoff seats. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA playoff tickets. So if you want to go to, say, a Braves game, or you want to go and catch the Hawks before their season ends potentially, make sure you check out Game Time today. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CHAT Sports for $20 off. I put all that information in the comments and description of today's video. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So here's the trade idea that I cooked up for you guys for what a trade back could look like. I could see the Texans at pick 25 wanting to jump up to 15. I picked the Texans for 2 specific reasons. One, their GM, Nick Caserio, has shown a lot of aggressiveness in the moves. He's made plenty of trades. He was fine to move back in last year's draft out of round 1, giving him more draft capital. So this year he may feel like, you know what, coming off back-to-back playoff appearances, let's be a little bit more on the aggressive side. We traded away our starting left tackle. If we want to get the number 1 tackle available to us at 25, let's ensure that by moving up to 15. Or let's say they want to get a wide receiver for C.J. Stroud since Stephon Diggs left. If Tet McMillan or Matthew Golden begins to slip, that to me seems like a prime trade-up opportunity. So in this trade, I've got Atlanta getting Houston's 3rd-round pick. The Texans actually have 2 third-rounders. So it makes it pretty manageable for them to move on from one of their 2 third-rounders. And now the Falcons are back into round 3. So with that being said, if they do trade back, let's say Mykel Williams is just not available. I've got a couple of targets in that mid-20 section to watch for when it comes to the Falcons. We'll start with the Boston College defensive end. He's 6'2", 248 pounds. 3-year starter for the Eagles, was not a big-time recruit coming out of New Jersey, where he's from, if I remember correctly. And all he did was just generate pressure and put together a ton of production. Donovan Ezeiruaku was a stand-up outside linebacker. He doesn't quite have the size to play a traditional defensive end in a 3-point stance. But if the Falcons trot out another 3-4 defensive front, this to me gives Arnold Ebiketie vibes in terms of his role. I'm not saying he's going to have the same production and career arc, but if you're looking for like a player comp for what the two did in college, there are some similarities from the profile standpoint. But 16.5 sacks last year. That's only half a sack behind Mike Green, who led the country in sacks, plus a boatload of tackles for loss. Now, the knock against him is he might just be a pass rush specialist. Someone who on 3rd and 10, you stick out wide, and he can just hunt the quarterback. That's not a bad thing to have in your back pocket. That may not be what you want to use a first-round draft pick on. If you're using a first-rounder on a player, the expectation should be they play a lot. If we're talking 3rd-round pick, okay, that can be someone that you plug and play a little bit. But if he is just a pure pass rush specialist and he doesn't have a lot going for him on the early downs, we got to balance the run versus the pass, round 1 seems a little early to me. And that's where if a team comes to that evaluation, they're probably going to look at him as a round 2 guy. Now, the other prospect I want to put on your mind is James Pearce, my Tennessee Volunteer, who's got a very different type of profile compared to Ezeiruaku. He's 6'5", 245 pounds. He ran a 4.47 40-yard dash. He is, pound for pound, one of the fastest players in this draft class. He's got great linear speed. The ball is snapped, and he is in the backfield. Now, speed versus power, those two do not translate from college to the pros as an edge rusher very well. If you're really fast in college, you're going to have a lot of success because offensive tackles in college, they are not super athletic. When you get to the NFL, those tackles, they're quick like cats. So if you made all of your money in college by just being faster than everyone else, you might have a rude awakening in the pros when your speed alone doesn't get you to the quarterback. Power in that situation can benefit players more. Now, usually the downside with power is you're big, but you may not be as athletic and twitchy. And if you don't get that first great step, then you're easy to get bottled up and contained. That's what makes guys like Myles Garrett and Von Miller such slam dunk prospects coming out. They were so fast and strong. You don't get guys like that every single draft. There's no one in that class like this. Not even really last year's class. So it is not every year you can find someone like that. But if the Falcons fall in love with the speed and feel that a little bit more time in the weight room and a little bit more power added to him, and you can get that bull rush developed, that's going to be a coaching side of things here. For Pearce, though, one of the knocks against him, really 2 or 3, now that I'm just piling on. 1, the slender frame, right? You're 6'5", and it looks like a string bean out there. Let's be honest with one another. That's 1. 2, there are some character concerns. There's been some mumblings of not being the best locker room guy. That's for the Falcons to do their homework on. I've never met James Pearce in person. I can't speak to it. But Atlanta, they brought him in for a visit. They've done meetings with him. They should definitely have a good feel for that question. If they're satisfied, if they're okay with it, then that's not a concern. The last concern would be the slight dip in production. He had 10 sacks in 2023, 7.5 in 2024. As someone who watched every single Tennessee football game, I can tell you that usually players feast when they play lesser competition early in the year to build up that stat sheet. Tennessee was blowing people out in the early stages of the year. James Pearce was playing like 15 snaps a game. So he only averaged, I think, 35 snaps a game this past season. You give him more opportunities on the field, and you could get more production. So circling back to this trade proposal, would you make this deal? How about this? Let me ask you this question. Would you do this deal knowing whoever your number 1 guy is at 15 isn't there at 25? Obviously, if you like Mykel Williams or if you like James Pearce or Malaki Starks or, dare I say, Emmanwori, and you could get him at 25 and get a third, then obviously we're all doing this trade, right? 1, it's cheaper for the Falcons because every single slot in the first round, the salary is predetermined, so more cap space in the future. But let me ask you that. If you can't get that number 1 guy, would you still move back 10 spots and get an extra third rounder out of it? If you want Mykel Williams, but you don't get him at 15 and you get James Pearce at 25 instead, are you doing that? For me, I'm open to it. And I'm open to it to the level of who do you want at 15? If it's someone like James Pearce, then I think the difference between him and Ezeiruaku is marginal. So, yeah, I'd be fine moving back and getting an extra third out of it. All right, let's wrap it up by picking a random viewer from our live show on Thursday. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Reid, let's spin that wheel. Who's going to be the viewer of the day? Big special shout out going to WCG. WCG, 2 claps for you. 1, 2. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll be back with a lot of content throughout the entire weekend.